Is it just me? Why does using any new app or software just plain old suck? Everything needs updating all the time. Buttons, menus, and functions are never where you left them. It all comes down to user experience and interface design, UX, UI. I'm Jack Wang, a scientist, microbiology professor, YouTuber, and podcaster, and we talk about the intersections between science, technology, and careers. Software developers and Silicon Valley are among the best and brightest minds in the world. So why is the end product that they produce so hard to use for the vast majority of users? Today, let's talk about 7 famous apps or pieces of software that violated one of the core principles in UX UI design. Number 7 is actually number 8, specifically Windows 8, released in 2012. Back then, people didn't use Windows because it was intuitive or hip and happening. They used it because it stayed true to the formula that worked for them. There was a new touch-optimized interface called Metro. The new interface was confusing and difficult to learn because everyone who wanted to use it was too accustomed to the traditional Windows desktop interface. It tried to do too much. Gestures, touch-enabled navigation techniques that worked on tablets didn't work so well on desktops and laptops, and even something as simple as accessing the start menu or switching between apps was very clunky. What I'm describing is a classic example of a failure in flexibility. Software should be flexible and adaptable, able to work on different devices, screen sizes, or resolution. The broader lesson we can take away from this is that communication largely comes down to expectation management and being flexible in adapting a message for different audiences and situations. Trying to be all things to all people at the same time never works, because when you try to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. For all of that though, you need to know I'm not a Luddite, okay? I'm technically a millennial in my 30s, like just barely in my 30s. I'm by no means a hardcore software engineer, but I can write some code. I have a degree in information technology, and I worked in bioinformatics. So there's no obvious reason why I would find a piece of software more difficult to use than the average person, but this does raise an interesting point. The myth of the digital native, the young person who grew up with the internet and can innately use all types of tech so much better than people who didn't grow up immersed in it or around it, but have had to figure it out on our own, the digital immigrants. Study after study has been done to measure the digital literacy of people born before or after a certain time cutoff, and it turns out that everyone is better at the tech they are more familiar with and use more frequently. So of course, younger users will be good at games, social media, and mobile apps. Give them a piece of software used in professional enterprise applications though, and they're as clueless as boomers trying to update their iPads. Familiarity and frequency of use are the biggest predictors of technological ability, not the year you were born. Look, everyone's a critic. It's easier to tear things down than build things up. Like I tell my students, don't raise a problem without thinking of a potential solution. So look, I lied. Example 6 is not a bad example, but instead the gold standard for software that everyone loves. Super Mario Bros., released in 1985 for the NES, is the most famous game that most people on the planet had either heard of or played for themselves. It had everything: plumbers, moustaches, princesses, mushrooms, pipes. Over 40 million copies sold worldwide. It clearly got something right. In this case, the UX UI design principle, emotion, creating a sense of satisfaction, pleasure, and accomplishments for users. The clinking sound effects of the coins, the graphical cues for extra strength after eating mushrooms. Everything was satisfying to play and replay time and time again. That's not fair, I hear you say. This is a game, not a piece of software designed for serious work. To which I say, why not both? Why isn't more professional software designed more like a game? Shouldn't your clients feel energized by looking through your portfolio through your custom client app? And shouldn't your team be engaged to collaborate online more frequently? In my field of education, we spend so much money on software that's used by so many people: teachers, students, administrators. What about a little flair to capture our emotion as users? That wouldn't hurt, would it? Okay, enough about Mario, onto 5, MySpace. The OG social networking platform, unbelievably popular in the mid-2000s. When you look back, that's actually really hard to believe. MySpace allowed users to customize their profiles with backgrounds, colors, and layouts of their own choice to every possible extent. It was chaos. Flashy graphics, crazy animations. Again, try to do too much. I'm sure MySpace made a lot of different mistakes to lose the lead to Facebook and all the other upstarts, but the main UX UI principle it violated was aesthetics. Software should be visually pleasing and consistent in design. Simple layouts, consistent typography and fonts and colors go a long way to make the user feel at ease with the app they're using for an extended period of time. This principle is not exclusive to software. Good visual design works in any context you can think of. PowerPoint slides for teaching, client presentations, big TV advertisements. Most scientists and engineers, and really myself, used to scoff at visual design as it's just a shiny veneer papering over lazy code, but I, for one, can concede it's not my area of expertise, so I need help. With AI platforms like Midjourney and DALL-E 2, though, that help looks more accessible, but more ethically ambiguous by the day. Number 4. Uber, which has pretty much achieved market saturation at this point. Everyone has the app installed on their phone, so what has it gotten wrong? If you have anyone in your life with any form of visual impairment, you don't know the answer to this question. Uber does not satisfy the UX/UI design principle of accessibility, being easily accessible by all users, including those with impairments or disabilities. Uber's app has small text, small font, and a lack of support for screen readers with no built-in voiceover feature, at least at that time of its launch. Limited support for accessibility APIs as well. There's also no obvious hierarchy, let's say, in the information displayed in the app. Whether something is hidden deep in the menu or laid out on the front page. Say something as simple as asking Uber for assistance on a trip or some issue with login. That kind of important information should be more prominent, while less important information should be less visually prominent. This idea is true in communication as well. Communicate important information first in a clear and concise manner, and do so repeatedly. 3. The Adobe Creative Suite. Graphic design, video editing, web developing, photography. Adobe has this market cornered. But look, any of those professions I've just mentioned, how accessible are they to people who've never done it before? Let's say you ask your parents to try editing a photo in Photoshop, to tweak the contrast, apply a film curve, and make it look like a vintage Polaroid. How quick will they be turned off the whole process and give up? It probably doesn't help that creatives are quite snobby, shall I say, when it comes to aesthetics and how things look, because that's their bread and butter, that's the whole brand and business. But none of these programs are designed for beginners, and it shows. Almost all of Adobe's software has a lot of different menus, options, and settings, and takes a significant investment of time to learn its full potential. This is a barrier for the vast majority of users, and this violates the simplicity UX/UI design principle. Software should have a simple and uncluttered interface with minimal use of jargon and technical language, just like in communication. Keep the message as simple and as streamlined as possible. Short, concise, to the point. Look, for me, this is the exact opposite of how I was trained as a scientist. We like to steep everything we say in jargon, to set up huge intellectual barriers for anyone to try and understand what you're saying. You really have to know what you're talking about to know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to work against that stereotype and break out of this mindset by, for instance, starting a podcast, Crossover Connections. You can watch the full video of our very first launch episode here, where we talk about COVID versus artificial intelligence, which is the greater disruptor to our lives. Now back to 2, Apple Maps, or the second most used Maps app by a very distant margin to Google Maps. It's only on the list because of the number of people using iOS devices by default. And when it was launched in 2012, its directions were inaccurate, and error messages and notifications were inconsistent, not to mention unclear. And when a route was being calculated or a search for the destination was processed, the user had no idea because there was no prompt or progress bar to let us know how long to wait. Like me, you probably just rage quit and turned on Google Maps at that point. The design principle in clear violation here is feedback. Users need to receive immediate feedback on their actions in that piece of software, and it can be a dialogue prompt, progress bar, sound effect, it can be anything, but it needs to be clear and timely. Most important of all, communicate what users should do next in the app so they can stay in the app. When you've lost their attention, you may have lost it for good, which is true in effective communication as well. Audience interaction is essential in my classrooms. It can't just be a one-way monologue. Ideally, it is interactive. You need to know how you're doing in the moment so you can improve how you perform in the future. And lastly, you knew we had to go there. Number 1, Twitter. Where shall we even begin? Depending on when you're watching this video, there's a whole array of different issues that have plagued Twitter. Misinformation, abusive cyberbullying, censorship, lack of transparency, bots, hemorrhaging money from lack of advertisers, and the principle that's been violated is, of course, credibility. Any piece of software should inherently be able to convince its users that it is reliable, trustworthy, and secure, especially as relates to privacy and security of user data. I think Twitter has clearly lost its credibility as the best place place to find a curation of unbiased and accurate information. And once you lose credibility, it's almost impossible to get it back. You can lose it all in an instant. UX, UI is incredibly expensive and difficult to get right because of the human element behind it all. Effective communication underpins all human-to-human interactions, and it will be the thing that saves us from the impending takeover by AI. If you're interested in my videos on how AI can be used to improve education and productivity, you can find it linked here. I'm Wang, this is the Biolab Collective. See you in the next video.